Greetings and welcome to Eminent Reflection. I would like to do a response video to a video that was pointed out to me a few days ago on Buzzfeed's YouTube channel called "An Ex-Republican and an Ex-Democrat Answered 10 Questions." Now, before I go on and do that, I want to point out why I'm doing this. First off, I think the people they interviewed had, in my opinion, rather brilliant responses, and I noticed the comments on that video were rather harsh, but then again, it's BuzzFeed, so that doesn't surprise me. The questions were asked once each, and then they let each of the two people answer the questions, and then they move on to the next ones. So I'm going to possibly skip over some parts of this, but I did want to start at the beginning where they introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Savannah. I'm 25 years old. I am an ex-Republican and now Democrat.
Hi, my name is Kat. I'm 27 years old and I am an ex-Democrat who now identifies as an independent with more conservative leanings.
Notice that the first person identified herself as an ex-Republican who's now a Democrat. The second person identified herself as an ex-Democrat who's now an independent. And I think this is really important to point out because, first off, I think the questions seem to have been written for a person who had, for two people who had political parties and had switched to a different political party. And in this case, we have an indication of two people who started with a political party and ended up one with a political party, a different political party, and the other one with no political party at all. That's what an independent is. So the questions don't quite fit. Keep that in mind. The next question they ask is where they're from. I'll leave a link in the description so you can catch all of the details of that, but I'm going to go ahead and skip over parts of that. I don't have proper software to edit this stuff with yet, so
I grew up in northern Indiana.
So I'm just going to kind of fast forward a bit.
City, I was basically in Elkhart, Indiana.
It is about 2 streets, and I grew up without television, so I have a little bit different background. I grew up with lots of nature and the radio station. When did you first learn what politics were?
I think
when did you
I
first learn what politics were?
Politics from my dad when I was like 6 or 7 years old, because he would make jokes, like he would make like little one-line, punchline jokes about like other political parties.
I want to stop that right there and just mention this is coming from a perspective of when a person is first learning about politics. They're talking about a young child, a rather impressionable age, often very much indoctrinated into politics, a lot like the way children are indoctrinated into religions. And just like, a child can be labeled as Catholic or Lutheran or Muslim or whatever the case might be, before they actually have any religious beliefs of their own. And a lot of times, they think they have the beliefs because they're told they have the beliefs when they haven't even made up their mind. The same thing goes for politics in a lot of cases, that children are taught to identify as whatever political party their parents have favored, or whatever political leanings their parents have favored, or other people around them. And again, formative years. So here she's talking about her dad making jokes and talking about politics and how this affects her view. So continuing.
And I started learning like, oh, this will be funny, and like that side's bad and this side's good. Like my dad would never say it that plainly, but you could tell from reading between the lines. I actually remember being like maybe 8 years old and 9/11 had just happened. And I was driving with my mom, we were stopping off at a fast food place. And we walked in and there was a news reporter there. And they were like, how do you feel about this? And I remember smiling because like my dad had made a joke about like Cuba. And I was like, yeah, I think it's good that the president is going to invade Iraq. I think he should do Cuba next. Because I thought it would be funny. And I had no idea. I was like 8 years old. And so, of course, they put my picture and that quote and the fact that I was 8 years old, like on the front page of our local newspaper. So,
and there we go. This is this happens so much. So children basically being exploited in a sense, and then not necessarily on purpose. I'm not saying that people do this, that they're going out of their way saying, hey, here's a chance to exploit a kid. But it's basically what ends up happening in a case like that, where the newspaper said, "Hey, this will get newspaper sales. This will get readers' attention," and it was a child responding to something that they learned from jokes about politics, and a lot of times people don't think of stuff like that. They when they're saying things and doing things around kids, whether their kids or anyone else's kids, they don't realize they're teaching in the process. And if they did stop to realize that, they might be a little bit more careful what they say and maybe give some explanations afterward. But hey, we're human beings, we're not perfect.
So when I was younger, I really enjoyed going up into my grandmother's attic and totally digging through all of her artifacts, her pins, buttons, travel items, all sorts of things. I noticed there was a lot of conservative buttons, paraphernalia, and it got me thinking, how could my loving, wonderful, artistic grandmother, be such a conservative supporter? But on an island half full of hippies, it feels like you would be absolutely alienated if you were conservative.
Okay, I'm going to stop this again. Just another comment, my personal thoughts. I'm thinking about, she mentioned that that she was thinking, how could this wonderful grandmother be a conservative? That isn't really saying it, but it's kind of implying that some seeds had been planted in the mind of conservative isn't good, and which might imply conservative people are bad people. And here she's looking at stuff that her grandmother had and saying, okay, so her grandmother had stuff that indicated an interest in conservative things, and how could this good person basically be a bad person? And of course, I don't know the whole story. Maybe her grandmother was conservative and stopped being conservative and became a better person. But I'm not saying conservative people are bad people either. And I definitely don't want to imply that, being conservative or being liberal makes someone a bad person. But such implications are often made in both directions. And again, kids growing up around adults making such implications, accusations, jokes, whatever the case might be, they're learning from that. I want to back this up just a little here.
Full of hippies, it feels like, and it got me thinking, how could my loving, wonderful, artistic grandmother, be such a conservative supporter? But on an island half full of hippies, it feels like you would be absolutely alienated if you were conservative. It was that little inkling when I was younger that now has blossomed into what I know now, which is that there's something very different than what we've been told.
what was your political affiliation growing up?
Now, I want to go back to what was just said by Kat. That she was realizing there's something very different to what we've been told. This is one of the reasons why I think both of these two people were rather brilliant in their responses, because and it makes sense, because they're both people who broke away from what they were basically indoctrinated with as young children, and recognized that that's that things aren't exactly the way that they appeared to be from that early indoctrination. And this is a hard thing. A lot of people are raised Republican or raised Democrat and think of themselves as that before they ever actually know what it means, and it becomes so ingrained in them, not just the being one or the other, but all of the stuff that goes with it, that they often tend to learn to think of the other of those two as having certain attributes that they can just assume based on the label, and and not being a good thing because they were taught, like, one's bad, the other one's good.
Different than what we've been told.
What was your political affiliation growing up? My political affiliation growing up was completely right-wing conservative. I would say up until the age of 12, I had this strong, I felt like my identity was like Christian, homeschooled in Indiana. I remember slapping campaign stickers for the McCain-Palin election like all over my notebooks and just posting about it on Facebook. Everyone around me where I was growing up was right-leaning, whether that be hardcore conservative or Republican libertarian.
Okay, here again we have someone who's saying that everyone around them when they were growing up was basically right-leaning. She described herself as right-wing growing up. So, and the way it was said sounds to me like a little on the extreme side. Not her specifically necessarily, but that's what she was being taught, is a little on the extreme side, and it's basically saying that there was a lack of any real contrast to that around. So I think that's again important to note. Now a lot of times that can backfire in a way when a child grows up never seeing the alternatives to a particular point of view. When they end up getting to see one of those alternatives, even if that alternative is dead wrong, they might embrace it because they realize the only one they ever got to see was wrong in at least some ways. And that's something that we should caution children and adults to be careful of, to not just go, okay, well, this is wrong, therefore that must be right, because that can often, and usually is, that can often be a false dichotomy, and there often are very many more than two choices, and yet we're taught to think of there only being two choices. In this case, those choices being Democrat and Republican, or liberal conservative, which are often equated as being the same thing, and they're not, but there's some similarities and some overlap there, so it's understandable, especially since we are often taught to think of things in terms of there's only two possibilities. Again, this country that I live in, the United States of America, has over 30 national political parties. We have two really big ones that are basically one and the same if you look at who's funding them and most of the stuff that they're doing. There are a few little differences. Some people would call them big differences because they're issues that divide people. But I would call them small differences because of the fact that compared to the many things they have in common, and considering the fact that those small differences will probably never get anywhere with either of the parties, because then they couldn't pretend to be very different anymore, it pretty much leaves them the same.
That was the spectrum.
So I was surrounded by Democrats. My family was not too active, so we're all kind of in that middle zone where you think, everyone's a Democrat, that's the right thing to be, and we're fed all these, things by the media about Republicans, so it feels not cool to be that way. What made you change your mind?
Okay, again, going to back this up just a little bit here. Again, Kat was talking about being surrounded by Democrats, and this influencing her as she grew up. And again, we're talking about a young child here. So once we get out of such situations as adults, we really should look at the things that we believe and ask ourselves, why do we believe these things? And, how can we be sure whether we're right or we're wrong? That's, epistemology. It's an important thing to look at. What are your tools that you use for deciding what you're right about and what you're wrong about? And are you consistent in using the same tools for everything? Or do you have exceptions where certain things you don't apply those tools, or you apply different tools? And if so, why? Why would you make such exceptions?
Fed all these, things by the media about Republicans, so it feels not cool to be that way. What made you change your mind?
I think it took a few years. I think that I changed my mind through teenage years into early adulthood. I think it really took growing up and seeing other parts of the world, maturing, getting out of my bubble, college, moving. But I think I remember the biggest thing that took me out of my bubble, and it was more so like a moral standpoint, is that I started doing musical theater around age 12 or 13, and that started exposing me to a broader sense of the community. And I remember I had tons of friends who were gay, LGBTQIA. It must have been the first Obama election into the second election that people kept talking about marriage and civil rights with LGBT. And I remember that being such a hot topic, and people around me in the community were saying stuff like, well, you can have a union, but you can't have a marriage. And I was like, wait, even being like 16, I'm like, that is the definition of being prejudiced. The political landscape around...
I just want to stop this again for a moment. She was talking about people breaking out of their bubble. That goes back to what I was saying about, being able to break free from indoctrination. If we're taught that things are a certain way. And a lot of times we don't even know we've been indoctrinated because it's so pervasive in society. And, in our family, in the town we live in, our neighborhood, possibly the whole state. That's why, they label states in this country, as in the United States of America, as red states and blue states. Why? Okay, so maybe there are more people who identify as Republican in a red state than Democrat, and more people who identify as Democrat in a blue state than a Republican. But in both cases, invariably, or at least almost invariably, I'm not sure if it's 100% consistent, but generally speaking, independents outnumber either one of them. And yet they don't call them independent states. Now, why not? Independence is supposed to be a big thing in the United States of America. That's why we celebrate Independence Day, which we generally don't call Independence Day. We just call it the 4th of July, but it's a specific day set aside to celebrate independence, and yet we have this thing where, independent voters are just kind of, pushed away, like they pretend that we don't exist. And we independent voters outnumber Democrats and Republicans. And that is, even if you count everyone who calls themselves a Democrat but really doesn't like the Democratic Party, they just, call themselves a Democrat because they're anti-Republican. And of course, those who call themselves Republican but really don't like the Republican Party, they just call themselves Republican because they're against the Democratic Party. And I know people who, will refuse to call the Democratic Party the Democratic Party. It's their name. I get it. It's not really democratic. It should be. It presents itself as being such, but it's not. So they don't want to use a name that sort of implies that it is. They call it the Democrat Party instead. But neither party really is exactly what it presents itself to be. They've got party elite who make the decisions on behalf of the people, and they've got processes that include the people in parts of their decisions, but they can override those decisions anytime they want. And the Democratic Party proved in 2016 they can flat out break their own bylaws, and then just turn around and tell the judge, yeah, but it's not your jurisdiction because we only broke our own bylaws. We only broke the laws we made for ourselves to follow. So, yeah.
That time with marriage equality and LGBT, with a lot of laws being passed from the other side to like suppress it, really, really, really pushed me into a different direction and a different path.
In the first election that I got to be a part of as a voter, I really got to think about politics for the first time. So this was around the time when Facebook was starting to really take off, and I was seeing a lot of libertarian forums and different perspectives, and I wondered, am I an anarchist? Like, why do I feel like what's going on politically with the Democrats is not making enough change? Why do I feel like there's a discordance there? And so I started to explore more groups, and I discovered the Green Party, which was a little bit anarchist and a little bit pro-earth, and then a little bit of workers' rights, which is the main thing that I'm now supporting is the working class. The first time I got to vote, I voted for Jill Stein as a Green Party candidate when it was Mitt Romney versus Obama. And
I'm just going to pause that for a moment here, back it up a little bit. What Kat was just saying about the Libertarian Party being slightly anarchist. There are different ways of labeling these things, but I have to say, yeah, libertarians generally push for small government, which is one of the ways that some people refer to conservatism. That they're talking about conservative in the sense of fiscally conservative, as in they don't want government spending a lot of money. It's okay for a lot of these people. It's okay for big corporations to spend a lot of money. It's not okay for government to spend a lot of money. It's okay for corporations to be huge, but not for government to be huge, which is, in my opinion, a little bit of a conundrum, because a government governs and a corporation also governs. It's kind of like the Democratic Party and the Republican Party write their own bylaws, and they govern with those bylaws. So the labels can be somewhat deceptive. And if you've got some huge corporation that is, say for example, they've got basically a monopoly on some particular service out on the internet, and that service is governed by that corporation, isn't that a form of big government? One big difference, of course, is they're not going to give you public sidewalks, they're not going to give you public streets, and everything that they give you access to, they own. And our governments, they may own, in a sense, the public streets and public sidewalks, but they're not going to turn around in general and tell the people, hey, you know what, we just decided to change our mind about these public streets and sidewalks being available to the public. They're ours. We're kicking you off of them. Whereas a big corporation giving you services online or through the mail or in a store, they can change their mind about such things whenever they want. Anything they've made available to the public, they can basically just say, you know what, it's not available to the public anymore. And a lot of times there are fundings coming from the government to help these large companies, and that's part of the assumption is they're going to do services for all of humanity, or for the citizens of the country that they're in. And if you've got a multinational corporation, which country are they in? Which citizens are they going to be doing services for? And what's to stop them from just deciding to say, yeah, you know what, we're only going to work to benefit ourselves. And it's like corporate welfare. The government gives a handout, and only the rich people get any benefit from it.
Stein as a Green Party candidate when it was Mitt Romney versus Obama. And I got a lot of flack for it. Like, why would you vote Green Party? Like, what is your vote gonna do? But I truly believe, and I still believe, that your vote needs to be a vote of conscience.
And I'm going to agree 100% with Kat on that. Your vote needs to be a vote of conscience. And yes, if you vote Green Party or Libertarian or Independent or Peace and Freedom Party or basically anything other than Democrat or Republican here in the United States of America, for most political positions, generally people are going to say, oh, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, you're going to be a spoiler, especially for high level position, federal government positions, the president of the United States. That's the big one, where people are going to say, hey, if you vote anything other than Democrat or Republican in the presidential general election, whoever they want most to keep from winning, they say you're helping that person win, and you're not. There are a lot of people in the United States who just don't vote at all, and the reason for that is because they correctly recognize that they have very little say in who wins, and that if they vote for either a Democrat or a Republican, in most cases they're voting for someone they don't want either way, and they're helping to elect someone they would rather not have elected, so they choose not to vote. But if that person can find a candidate that they really want, even a little bit, and vote for that candidate, at least they're doing no harm, and they might be doing some good. The Green Party could win in an election where enough people decided we're going to vote Green Party, in spite of the fact that everybody says that's a vote for Democrat or a vote for Republican. The Libertarian Party could win the same way, or an independent candidate could win the same way. Now, in the case of independents in the presidential election, we've got a problem. We, the people, should be able to put a candidate on the ballot in all 57 contests, all 50 states, and D.C. and the American Samoas and so on. We should be able to do that. The Democratic Party can do it. The Republican Party can do it. With a heck of a lot of work, one of the smaller parties can do it. For the people, it's basically impossible. Actually, I probably shouldn't even say basically. I think it's just plain impossible the way things are. We would have to get laws changed because, for example, here in California, where I'm at, if a candidate runs for a party nomination, any party nomination, even a small party, and that party says, no, we're not going to nominate you, which, the people really have no say over, because the parties can internally decide whatever they want, regardless of all the stuff they do to make it look like it's a government process. Once they've done that, California law says that the people then can't put them on the ballot. Now, we can still make them a certified independent, which we did in 2016 with Bernie Sanders. We made him a certified independent here in California. A lot of states have ways that things like that can be done, and in 2016, Bernie Sanders broke records all over the country as a write-in candidate, even though most people didn't even know he was still running, and he was out campaigning for the Democratic Party's nominee after the DNC had stolen the nomination from him and gave it to Hillary Clinton, because he felt that Donald Trump would be a very bad person to get elected, and that the only way to stop that was to elect the Democratic Party's nominee. So he tried, and that failed. And a whole lot of people say, oh, it's the fault of independents, it's the fault of people who voted Green Party or Libertarian or whatever. No, it's not our fault. It's not the fault of people who didn't vote at all either, although those people could have made a difference in one way or another by choosing to vote. The question then would be, what difference do they want to make? And if if they recognize that voting for Democrat or voting for Republican, either way, would be helping to elect someone they would rather not have elected, then maybe they should, consider voting for an independent. Again, if the choices aren't there, if they're literally not there at all, like some states won't allow you a write-in. Some states, like here in California, a write-in has to be certified in order to be able to be counted. Some states you can write in anybody and they will count it, and it makes you wonder then, if they can do that in some states, why can't they do it in others? Are our votes really not worth enough to go through the bother of counting them? Is a vote that unimportant to the people in charge? These are things we should be asking them, and maybe telling them if we feel a little differently about it.
I truly believe, and I still believe, that your vote needs to be a vote of conscience.
What does your family think about your beliefs? My family definitely knows. I would say take those angsty teen years when I was 17 or 18, and then when I was like, I'm going to break free from Amish town. I definitely use that as a way to poke and jab at my parents. I would love to sit down with my family and have a more mature, older conversation, but being in my younger years, I feel like I've directly been told things like, oh, I remember when I went to college and thought I was a liberal too, and then I grew up and I learned, and it's like, it's so demeaning. I think the older I get and the more healed I get myself, that I realize a lot of people's reflections are projections of their own understanding.
In the beginning,
Okay, I'm going to back up here just a bit and talk about what Savannah was just saying. That, yeah, a lot of people, well, of course, we all view things from our own point of view. It's all we really can do. We can emulate other people's points of views if we understand them well enough, and attempt to look from a point of view that's an emulation of someone else's. That's not the way we would normally look at things, and I think it's a very healthy thing to do, to sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes, metaphorically speaking, and think about why would they think certain things, and what reasoning are they using. And if you don't know, if you get a chance, ask people, talk to them about it, and see what they have to say about why they think a certain way, or do they really think the way that you think they think. Often we end up what they call straw manning a person's position without even realizing we're doing it if we're not careful. What that means, straw manning, for anybody who doesn't know, there's a logical fallacy called a straw man argument, which is basically where you attack a position that is made out to be the position the person holds, but it's not actually the position the person holds. Like, for example, when a flat earther attacks people who believe that the earth is spherical by saying, well, you believe that the earth is spinning like a top, and if it was spinning like a top, we'd all be flying off of it. Well, yeah, probably. If you consider, if you spin a top and it's going around 10, 20, 30 revolutions per second, if you spun the earth that fast, the earth would probably kind of fly apart. And so, yeah, we're held to the earth the same reason rocks and mountains and bodies of water are held to the earth, by gravity. And if you spun the earth that fast, yeah, those things would have more momentum going away from the center of the planet than they would gravity pulling them toward the center of the planet, and the shape of the earth would change rather substantially as a result. But of course, it's, although there may be some people who actually believe the earth is spinning that fast, assuming that to be the case for anyone who believes the Earth is spherical is making a big mistake. Because just believing the Earth is spherical or roughly spherical doesn't mean that you believe that it's spinning fast like a top. As a matter of fact, the word spin implies fast rotation, and technically the Earth does not rotate fast. There's a separate usage of the word spin specifically for the rotation of the Earth. In all other cases, it means fast rotation. In the case of the rotation of the Earth, it rotates one revolution every 24 hours. Try to spin a top that slowly and get it to stay up. It's not going to. As a matter of fact, if you spun a top one revolution every 24 hours in zero gravity out on the space station or something where it doesn't have to stay standing up on a table, you could watch it for a very long time and not be able to tell that it's rotating at all, because that's pretty slow. So yeah, moving on.
Those reflections are projections of their own understanding.
In the beginning, my family has been kind of individualistic when it comes to politics. Like, it's your personal matter. We don't really want to talk about it too much because it does get a little heated. I think even on Facebook, when I would make a lot of political posts, I would have family members who I love very dearly reach out to me and say, "Are you sure you want to talk about this?" And that's when I'm like, oh, should I even be treading on people's toes? Do I want to make my family feel like maybe I don't agree with them? But yeah, over time the shift has been from me being able to express how I feel to how something will benefit all of us. And so I think that's helped the conversation, is how I bring it about as well. I'm trying not to be so divisive. I'm not so pointed. I'm trying to be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and that together, like, we can get to the same destination. What does your party stand for?
Okay, I'm going to back up here to what Kat was just talking about. Yeah, so often people are told that, they shouldn't talk about politics with, close friends, with people they're involved with family members. Just avoid it because, it gets heated. And especially avoid it with anybody who they know has a different opinion than them. But their opinions. How are we supposed to learn if our own opinion is wrong? How are we supposed to learn that it's wrong if we'll only ever talk with people who share our own opinion? If I believed that 2 + 2 was 5 and I hung around only with people who believed 2 + 2 was 5, I think I'd have a hard time finding the flaw in that, because for whatever reasoning it took to believe that in the first place, and to hold on to such a belief, all of those other people would probably be doing pretty much the same thing. Now, as an example, if I ask the question, does 1 + 1 always result in a one-digit number? The answer is no, because it depends on what base system you're doing math in. 1 + 1 in base 10, the number system that we use the most in modern human societies, results in the number 2, written with a single digit. But in base 2, where each position is double the value of the position next to it, to the left or to the right, depending whether it's big endian or little endian. If we go with big endian, meaning higher values first, then 1, 0 is the result you get from adding 1 and 1. A 1 in the 2's place and a 0 in the 1's place. The 1 in the 2's place has a value of 2, and the 1 in the 0 in the 1's place has a value of 0. So 2 + 0, of course, that's the same as 1 + 1. But the question of, does 1 + 1 always result in a positive number? not a positive number. Does 1 plus 1 always result in a single digit number? Again, if I believe the answer to that was yes, and I refused to talk to anybody who thought differently, how would I ever learn that no, the actual answer is no. It doesn't always result in a single digit number. There are exceptions. There's a lot of things that we shield ourselves from and have trouble learning as a result. And a lot of times that shielding is not because we're afraid to learn, but because we're afraid of a conflict. And as Kat was saying, if you approach it right, you can avoid it becoming a conflict and say, look, we both want to make things better. I know stuff, you know stuff, we don't know the same things. I'm wrong about some things, you're wrong about some things. If we can admit that much, then we know there's stuff that we can learn from each other. If we're right about different things and wrong about different things, we have stuff we can learn from each other. And if we're willing to talk with each other about what we think is right and what we think is wrong and why we think it, what reasoning we have for believing that we're right, and what tools do we use for deciding what's true and what's false. These discussions can be very helpful, and can also help to give us a better picture of what other people think, what humanity as a whole thinks. That we're not as homogenous as everybody all thinks the same way, and it's not a dichotomy of there's people who think this way and people who think that way and nothing else.
Together, we can get to the same destination. What does your party stand for?
My party, I feel like, is going through an identity crisis. Party has folded in on itself. So I feel like what I define as my party for Democrats is a little up in the air. Media-wise, they want me to say it's caring, or more sociologically involved and progressive. But at the same time, I haven't seen it be. Ideally, my party would stand for independence and an entity that is not enchained by another entity above them.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what she meant by an entity that's not enchained by another entity above them, but I'm thinking that might be a reference to, big money donors, the plutocrats controlling the oligarchy that runs the Democratic Party, which, of course, that same plutocracy also controls the oligarchs that run the Republican Party. And probably to a smaller extent, but still somewhat, a lot of the smaller parties as well, if not all of them. Probably not all of them, but if any of them get big enough to pay attention to, yeah, it'll probably happen with those as well. Bernie Sanders has been working very hard to try to change that within the Democratic Party, and so there is a progressive wing of the Democratic Party, if you can call it that. It's not a separate thing that you can just say, this is the progressive wing and here are the people in it. But if different ways of looking at different facets of the party, so to speak. There are people who are pushing more toward progressive values, toward making progress for humanity, instead of trying to keep things the way they are for the sake of those who are doing wonderfully at everybody else's expense. The super rich few who just love having all of these desperate people willing to do pretty much anything just to earn enough money to get by, to work unreasonable numbers of hours to basically get out of life what an animal gets in the woods for free, more or less. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders says that, in a human society, things like medical care should be considered a human right. Because, in an advanced human society, having a right to medical care when it's needed is not that different from having a right to clean air and clean water when it's needed. And yet, even that, we have people out there saying, well, hey, we want to build these oil pipelines, and we know they're going to leak, but we're going to tell you they won't. And we know they're going to end up poisoning water supplies, but we're going to tell you they won't because we're making money off of that, and we don't give a crap about you. And that's got to change. So, yeah.
My party would not be paid off by billionaires, paid off by world banks, paid off by other countries, paid off by lobbyists and corporations.
Where I fall on the spectrum between libertarian, conservative, and justice democrat, social democrat, whatever you want to call it, is absolutely liberty. It's absolutely patriotism. It's healthcare. It's clean water. It's clean food. It's these basic rights. And then it's looking back at natural law and our Constitution and going back to the foundation. So I feel like that structure can fit into several different parties. It's ultimately, who is the party benefiting? Is it the corporations or is it the people? And so I'm all about the people, and any party that is for the people, the working class people, and our rich fellows, all of the people, because all of the people deserve to have equal benefit from the government's labor.
What do you think?
Okay, again, going back to what Kat was just saying, she said quite a bit there, and I'm not sure how much I can piece together responses to in one go, but give it a try. She was talking about, several facets of what should go into a political party, and basically saying that, this could fit any of several different political parties. As an independent, I'm an independent, she's an independent, we've got that in common. I would say, we don't really even need a political party for that. The problem, though, is if we don't have a political party, then we don't have any way to consolidate our votes on things and say, okay, well, we independents will all vote for this, because we independents don't all agree with each other. But here's the catch. If you're a libertarian, you don't agree with all libertarians on everything either. And, I mean, if for example, let's say, you agree with all other libertarians, say that, maybe all libertarians agree that government should be kept small. But maybe you have a different idea of what that means than another libertarian. Maybe there's a libertarian candidate running who has a different idea of what that means than you do. And the Libertarian Party says, well, look, we need all the votes we can get, so vote for this candidate because he's representing your party. And you're going, but that's not what I mean by that. And what ends up happening is that political parties basically take our democracy away. They amplify the democracy of those people who agree with those who are running the party, and they basically steal the democracy of everybody else who joins the party and has to support the things that those running the party tell them to. I want to back this up a bit and see if I can go over this piece by piece.
By lobbyists and corporations.
Where I fall on the spectrum between libertarian, conservative, and justice democrat, social democrat, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, there's a bunch right there. Between libertarian, conservative, justice democrat, social democrats. Okay, social democrat, social democracy, or democratic socialism, very similar concepts. There's a lot of overlap there, and a lot of people Bernie Sanders identifies himself as a democratic socialist. A lot of people say that he's incorrect in calling himself that because they've heard him say what he stands for, what he's pushing for, and they say that's social democracy, not democratic socialism, and that he should call himself a social democrat. Then she mentioned the Justice Democrats, which that's a group that has formed within the Democratic Party, and also some people outside of the Democratic Party, trying to help push the Democratic Party to be more about justice in terms of social justice, income justice, wealth justice, health justice, just to make things just in a lot of different areas. And then there's the conservatism, which, as I mentioned, that can be several different things. You can be conservative in the sense of, for example, saying you want small government, or conservative in the sense of you want things to remain more or less the way they are and not change, sort of being a lack of progressivism or regressivism. A lot of times people are regressive and they call that conservative, like, for example, when somebody says something like "Make America Great Again," meaning that they want to turn the clock back and make things like they used to be in some idealized time that probably never actually existed, but at least in their minds and in the minds of the people who are agreeing with them, there supposedly was such a time, and they want to go back there. They want to regress to that time, that situation, that way of doing things. And so trying to keep my train of thought straight here. At any rate, so basically what she's talking about here, and my point of view, and she can feel free to make a video responding to this and correct me if I got any of this wrong, or if she just feels like it, but is being an individual, being independent, being yourself, which she mentioned, growing up, that was kind of encouraged, just be your own person and think your own way. And I think that was a good way to start, even surrounded by Democrats or people who identified as Democrats. You might have been surrounded by people identifying with a major political party, but being taught to make up your own mind and think your own way, I think, was a good start.
Is absolutely liberty. It's absolutely patriotism.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. This is one thing I'm not sure what she means by patriotism in this case. Now, liberty, I think liberty is pretty self-explanatory. There are, of course, liberties, various aspects of various kinds of liberty. Patriotism, I wouldn't say is, in my opinion, I wouldn't say is even a good thing necessarily. And it might be a matter of how extreme, because for example, to say our country should come first, well, why should we put our country first? It's easy enough to do more stuff for our own country because we're in our own country. But does that mean that it should necessarily come first? In other words, if you are visiting, let's say, Japan, and while you're visiting Japan, you decide to take some political actions, or maybe take up a temporary job, or whatever the case might be. Should you be, if you're a citizen of the United States of America, should you be working to make things better for the United States of America at the expense of Japan while you're in Japan? Or should you just be working to make the lives of people around you better because they're around you? Because that's what you can most easily access. I mean, it could be a heck of a lot of hard work to make a small positive difference in a country you're not in, where you could put that same amount of effort in and make a lot more positive change in the country you are in, without having to think of it in terms of put one country ahead of another. So my thoughts on that, and I would like to hear what Kat has to say about those thoughts. But yeah, my thoughts, and yeah, continue on from there.
It's healthcare, it's clean water, it's clean food, it's these basic rights. And
okay, and there again, healthcare, clean water, clean food stuff I was talking about earlier, basic rights. These are all things that are necessary, at least at some time, and this I think is the key to understanding. I mean, there are different kinds of socialism. There are different levels and degrees and extremities of socialism, and social programs and so on. But I think most of us, all we're really asking for is fairness. And part of that fairness, in order to make things fair, is to not charge people for things that are needed when they're needed. I mean, for example, when a baby's born, you generally expect that baby to be given clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, or milk to drink, as the case might be, nutrients, nutrition, without having to go out and get a job and earn the money to pay for it first. Now, what if a child is born into a poor family that doesn't have any money to give them, doesn't have any connections to help them to get a good job or a good education? And here in the United States, okay, of course, we've got free public schools up to a point, but then if that's not enough to get by in life, maybe it's got to go to a higher point. Maybe we've got to expand that a little farther, and make sure that a person can get the education they need to get by in life, and not what would have helped them to get by 30 or 50 or 100 years ago, because it's not the same. Things are changing.
And it's looking back at natural law in our Constitution and going...
Okay, natural law and the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution is... one of the founding documents of the United States of America. Of course, there are other constitutions as well, but here in the USA, we generally refer to that one as the Constitution. And it, of course, has amendments. It was designed to be amended. There isn't anything built into it to ever get rid of an amendment once it's been put in, although you can write another amendment, add another amendment that overrides an earlier amendment, and a lot of our legal systems are like that. And then natural law, of course, that comes from way back in England, I think, was where the concept sort of originated and got that name. Of course, that being basically the idea that there are... I'm probably not going to word this well. I could look up a definition for it. In fact, I think I'll just go ahead and do that. Let's see what to look this up in. I'm going to pull up a separate window and just run a quick definition search. But natural law, my understanding of it, as best as I can articulate it in this moment, is that it's... there are two forms of natural law. There's natural law in the sense of like gravity is a natural law, and there's natural law in the sense of like if two people are living together as if they're married by natural law, or a facet of that which is called common law. Which is common law, of course, is something that's written into a lot of legal documents. They say, in this such and such a state or whatever, that common law says that if you live together for a certain amount of time, you're considered married or something like that. Natural law is not so much written down and defined very specifically, as it's just something that's considered to be there to predate humans, to just be a part of nature, and or at least something that can be treated as if it's just a part of nature. And I just pulled up a definition from Google. The first definition that came up says a body of unchanging moral principles regarded as a basis for all human conduct. And definition 2 says an observable law relating to natural phenomena. That's like I was saying, like the law of gravity, for example, would be considered a natural law in that sense. So close that back up and continue on from here.
Back to the foundation. So I feel like that structure can fit into several different parties. It's ultimately, who is the party benefiting? Is it the corporations or is it the people? And so I'm all about the people.
And there we go. There's what I think it really should be about, is all about the people. Now, the Democratic Party presents themselves as being all about the people. The Republican Party, not so much. I mean, they basically present themselves as being being for the people, being for themselves. In other words, like everyone for themselves. It's sort of akin to anarchy. They want government, but they want the government to be small, and the idea there being that the wealthy then have more say in things because the government can't tell the wealthy people what to do. But the poor people end up being told what to do then, not just by the government, but by the wealthy people as well, because they're basically saying, well, whoever can manage to gain the most power over other people, just let them, and put little or no limitations on that. And so those are different ways of looking at things. And again, I have my view on what's right. Kat has her view. Savannah has her view. Other people have their views. We need to talk about these things, not just say, I'm right, you're wrong, end of story, shut up, go away. Because, if we as humanity really want things to get better for ourselves, we need a better world to live in. Human society is outgrowing the planet we're on. And we're not going to be able to just keep, escaping to other places. If we can't figure out how to get off of this planet and live elsewhere, we're going to have to learn to get along here. And sure, we should do both, but in the meantime, right now we're just really not equipped to start moving off the planet. So we really need to learn to get along here.
Any party that is for the people, the working class people, and our rich fellows, all of the people, because all of the people deserve to have equal benefit from the government's labor.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about your political party? I would say the biggest misconception about Democrats is a lot of misconceptions that are made to perpetuate stereotypes. Every single person is like this feel-good, do-gooder that just loves to pat their own back and cry in a corner. That's like such a stereotype for Democrats. To me, that's not what I've experienced. I've experienced a lot of, it's almost like Democrats have been associated with being feminine. So it's like they're too soft, they're too emotional. There can be extreme courage within softness. And people don't get that.
And YouTube just decided to go into an advertisement.
Are you tired of the media spinning the truth and pushing false narratives? Well, take a look at this. Over the last 3 years,
go ahead and do that. So
the main fear I have as being more conservative now is being mistaken as a racist, as a anti-human, as a non-intelligent being. I've heard all sorts of things about conservatives. It's fascinating to hear how both sides have a very warped perspective of the other. By dehumanizing anyone, it just hurts yourself. Like, ultimately, our end goal is unity, and the more we sit around and try to paint the other person as an animal, the longer it's going to take to get to where we need to go. And you look back in history and all the terrible things that have happened, they've used dehumanizing tactics to make people feel like they have a certain supremacy and a privilege to believe what they do. And so we've got a great painted landscape of division because of the media thinking that one side is evil. What is one thing you would change about your
I'm going to go back here. There was a lot said, and I want to go over that somewhat piece by piece here. So hope anybody who might watch this will bear with me. Back it up just a little bit.
And people don't get that.
The main fear I have as being more conservative now is being mistaken as a racist.
Okay. Notice the wording, and again, Kat's welcome to tell me if I didn't get the meaning of this right, but saying what she's worried about, or the fear she has in being more conservative now. I'm assuming that means in comparison to the way she was brought up, or what she had known for most of her life. Again, choosing in this case, basically, as I understand it, basically being sort of asked to present it that way because it fit the questions better, but to present as conservative as opposed to more conservative than she had been, which might be center left, center right, don't know. Might be somewhere that's not left or right. I mean, we go, we're taught to think, here's the left, here's the right, everybody's at one end or somewhere in between, and nobody's up here, down there, back here, whatever. How many dimensions of politics are there? There's a lot more than just one. And I mean a lot more. I don't mean there's three. I mean there's a lot more than just one. I don't know the actual number of them, but it's easy to pick three and still have many more left over. So using those labels, yeah. A lot of people will take a label and say, okay, you called yourself conservative, therefore, you're a racist, or you're a sexist, or you're a homophobe, or you're this, you're that, you're whatever. And, same thing if you call yourself a liberal. That there are a lot of people who will go, oh, that means you're a communist, and, you like dictatorships, which is kind of an interesting conundrum, because technically communism is incompatible with dictatorship, but yet there are dictators who have called their dictatorships communism, because basically what they do is they say, okay, well, there's like two classes of people in society. There's me, and then there's everybody else, and everybody else gets communism. Well, I personally get dictatorship over the communism, and that has happened. But you get the same thing. You can get the same thing from a dictator who's got dictatorship over democracy, or dictatorship over capitalism, or dictatorship over anything else. A dictator just kind of screws things up for everybody but themselves, unless they, happen to, be just a really nice person who, is dictating. And why would they dictate if they're a really nice person? I mean, it's probably not going to happen. So, yeah, moving on.
As a anti-human, as a non-intelligent being.
Yeah, and that's another one. A lot of conservatives, and I notice patterns. There are patterns, and there are stereotypes that fit a lot of times a large number of people in a group. That doesn't mean they fit everyone, and to make the prejudiced assumption of assuming that someone fits that because a lot of people in the group they're in fit that, that's a mistake. But I have noticed patterns, like, for example, conservatives in general tend to be more geared toward absorbing sound bites rather than full arguments. um, being, more ready to be just told what to think rather than figuring it out for themselves. Told what to think specifically by someone that they see as authoritative. And then they can be told who to think is authoritative by someone else they think of as authoritative, and it makes them very manipulatable. It's probably why Donald Trump once said that, while he was a Democrat, said that, if he ever ran for president, he would run as a Republican because they're easier to fool. And that's the kind of stuff he's been using. He manipulates conservatives. And of course, the Republican Party is, at this point, a conservative party. Now, when the Republican Party first came out, that was the liberal party. And then when the Democratic Party came out, that was the conservative party. And then later on, they switched which was which. So these things are not written in stone and unchangeable. The question is, are the people going to make either party or any of the other parties out there what they want them to be? Or decide, let's just make a system that takes some of the power or all of the power or as much of the power as possible away from these political parties and gives it back to the people. Because these political parties have been making law after law after law to take power away from the people and give it to the political parties. And as a result, the parties have all the power, but that doesn't mean that the party members have the power, because the party members aren't the ones who make the decisions for the party. For example, in 2016, there was an advisory group of some type that had people from the different candidacies, the people appointed by the different candidacies to make advice on how the new rules should be put together. But they weren't the ones who made the new rules. They could only give advice. The people who made the rules were all picked by one person. So ultimately, that one person, in a sense, got to make all the rules. Got to decide, who's going to do the things they personally want done to the rules going forward for the Democratic Party. And so is that really a party of the people? Because, if they really wanted it to be a party of the people, maybe they should write the rules as a wiki, kind of like, the way Wikipedia is, and, let different people edit it and modify it, and possibly put it in some kind of a voting system where the people could come to some sort of a consensus and say, yeah, we like this change, let's keep it. We don't like this change, throw it out. This change is something we can work with, let's modify it. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but just like I said, giving my thoughts.
I've heard all sorts of things about conservatives. It's fascinating to hear how both sides have a very warped perspective of the other. By
yes, they do tend
anyone,
to.
It just hurts yourself. Like, ultimately, our end goal is unity, and the more we sit around and try to paint the other person as an animal, the longer it's going to take to get to where we need to go. And you look.
One point of clarification. I know what she means by as an animal. I think I would word that as just an animal, because if we treat each other as less than human, which I think that was the meaning there, we are human. Treating other humans as less than humans is a mistake. But scientifically speaking, humans are animals. I saw something recently where somebody was saying something about a crustacean, a crab or something like that. That they said that's not an animal, because apparently by animal they were thinking of mammals, and I just laughed because that is an animal. A starfish is an animal. A worm is an animal. A gorilla is an animal. A human being is an animal. A slug is an animal. It's a pretty wide group. But that colloquial usage of animal as meaning non-human animal is definitely out there. So I'm not trying to correct the usage. I'm just, like I said, sharing my thoughts. A little clarification on what I think was meant by that. And moving on.
As an animal, the longer it's going to take to get to where we need to go. And you look back in history and all the terrible things that have happened, they've used dehumanizing tactics to make people feel like they have a certain supremacy and a privilege to believe what they do. And so we've got a great painted landscape of division because of the media thinking that one side is evil. What is one thing you would change about your political party?
People pretending like they're so awake and so self-aware that they literally shoot down every single person who is actually trying to help them in their community. There was actually a time online where I got into a small argument with a few people, and out of nowhere it turned political. Then out of nowhere, I remember I was in like a Home Depot or some place that didn't have phone signal, and I was doing stuff. I come out 45 minutes later and I had hundreds of notifications, personal messages, all this stuff. They had gone back into photos of mine from like 10 years ago when I was 12 years old, and it was a picture of me at a Sarah Palin rally in Indiana. And they basically had posted it everywhere saying like, look at you, you white Republican, you privileged bitch, like all this stuff. And I said, okay, I hear you, I'm listening, let's talk. And they're like, where's my apology? You aren't responding because you don't care. And it was like, there was nothing I could say, do, speak, anything like that would remedy the situation, any angle I would take. And then on top of it, I was being doxxed. I was being threatened on private message. And it was just insane to me because I felt like we actually deep down had similar morals and on the surface voted for the same party. So it was a total mutiny that was a triggered chain reaction just by emotions. It was so... It's been like 5 years and I still think about it. I wish I...
Just pausing that for a moment. I didn't want to cut her off in the middle of a sentence, but there's, again, so much being said, and I do want to respond to some of that. Now, here's the thing. I don't expect this person to ever see my comments on this video or respond to me. If she ever does see it, I'm not expecting a response. If she does respond, I might not see her response. This is the nature of the internet, of communication in today's world, where it's not like face-to-face conversation is the only way of talking with each other anymore. And you can say something and have it buried in a flood of other things other people are saying, or you can say something and have no one ever hear it, and no way of knowing if anyone ever will. You can say something and have a whole bunch of people hear it or see it and respond to it, and you maybe never get to know that it was responded to at all, or maybe someday you find out that there's a flood of responses and you can't get a word in edgewise to reply to any of the responses. Maybe you reply to someone and they never see your reply, and then they think you never replied, and they think the reason you're not replying is because whatever reason they come up with, because you don't want to, you don't have an answer, whatever the case might be. Or sometimes they don't think that, but they'll say that anyway because maybe depending on the person, maybe they just want to validate their own point, not by actually showing that they're right, but rather by pointing at the fact that it doesn't look like you responded to it, and saying, see, therefore I must be right, because otherwise they would have said why I'm wrong. And that's not how things work. I mean, if you want to show that you're right, show that you're right. Don't expect someone else to show that you're wrong. That's not their job. That's not their responsibility.
So for conservatives, the main thing that I would address is just understanding where the liberals are coming from. Like someone like me who grew up on an island with a radio instead of television. And
just stopping there for a moment. Notice the question was about the political party. She's answering about conservatives, but she's saying to know where the liberals are coming from. And that, of course, works both ways. That is, we can generalize that and just say, we all should try to learn where each other is coming from on as much of a personal and individual level as possible, rather than just by category. And as a matter of fact, if you know by category, that may be helpful in understanding the processing of that category. But you can't just apply that to an individual and assume it fits. That's called prejudice, and sadly it does happen a lot.
Who is surrounded by other liberals, like, I'm not an evil person because of that, and only upon my discovery of conservative values did I see that we both have a warped perspective of the other, and that the only reason I felt that opposition from conservatives because they thought the same about me. And so now at the end of it, I'm seeing, okay, conservatives, like, I understand you think the liberals are communists. I know you think they're going to take everything from you and your guns, but we actually all kind of want the same things. And at the end of the day, you just got to give people time to come out of the cave. You got to give them time to come from where they're coming from. And all of us are going to the same place. And I think we all need to just be on an individual level first, and then come to the table with what we have to offer politically.
What do you think about our current political climate? Among the death threats, emotional labor, and everything, I started seeing that there's not really any winning. I think the conversations I have now politically is that this whole liberal-Republican deal is binary, and it is a purposeful either-or black and white situation to pit.
I'm going to just stop that right there. I'm going to back it up a little bit and catch what she just said again. But that, I think, is one of the most important things that we can talk about, is that, yes, it has been very much intentionally and in some cases unintentionally set up as a sort of black and white situation, this or that, as if there are only two choices, and they're completely separate from each other, and completely separate extremes. We are taught to think of, for example, Democrat and Republican as opposites. They're not opposites. They are opposite in some ways. They're opposite about certain things. But to just think of them just as opposites is not enough. And it's far from accurate, because they have much more in common. The Democratic and Republican parties have much more in common than they have different from each other, and a lot of what they have in common has been made that way by the people with all the money and power who fund the campaigns of the politicians who run under those parties for political offices. And they don't have to. It's not the only way, but a lot of them do believe that they do have to. They think it is the only way, and it is the easiest way. That much, I think, is pretty easy for just, I would say, anybody to agree on. If there's somebody who disagrees with me on it, feel free to leave a comment and say so. But I mean, it is a difficult thing for anyone to run for a political office at any high level of government and win without running as either here in the United States, running as either a Democrat or a Republican, and letting their campaign take money from people who are very likely to expect favors in return, and are very likely to consider their donations to be an investment, and are very likely to be expecting a return on that investment. It's really hard to get away from that. And Elizabeth Warren, for example, she kind of went back and forth on it. She had said, that she wasn't going to take any money from, from super PACs. She wasn't going to have any such thing, and she was going to turn down the money from the billionaires. And then she was asked, well, is that just in the primaries or in the general election? And she says, well, in the primaries I'm going to do this, and but in the general election, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, in the general election all bets are off, because we don't want to lose the general election. And she sort of went back and forth from okay, we'll take their money. No, we won't take their money. Well, except in the general election. Okay, we won't take it there either, or maybe we will. And I don't mean to pick on Elizabeth Warren. It's not just her. A lot of candidates are trying to figure out how to do this whole, let's not take the money that's ruining the system. And it's difficult, so they're looking for a way to maybe partially do it, try to go as far that way as they can without putting themselves out of a job. And look at Bernie Sanders. He has really stuck to his position in that regard and said, no, I'm just not going to take that money. My campaign is not taking it at all. And as a result, he ended up with what very much appears to be a conspiracy. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just an observation that, yes, there was some apparent conspiring going on to try to find anybody who could beat him in the nomination process. Because, people who have control of things through their money and power that they, currently use to keep control of elections don't want someone being elected who isn't taking their money. Because how are they going to manipulate that person? They don't have the position to do that. They don't have Bernie Sanders' ear. They can't say, hey, Bernie Sanders, thanks for inviting us, to your big rich people's only gathering so we can fund your campaign. I'd like to talk to you about how we want such and such done. They don't have that option with him. It's hard for anybody to get a chance to talk to Bernie Sanders. But you can write a letter to, say, for example, info@berniesanders.com and, make a suggestion for the campaign. He may or may not get it. A lot of people send such letters. And, one person trying to go through them all is probably a complete impossibility. But at least that way, we don't get some billionaire who has priority over you, who can, get direct access when you can't. So, it's a work toward improvement, and I'll go back to what she was saying here. I want to back it up a little bit more.
Everything. I started saying that there's not really any winning. I think the conversations I have now politically is that this whole liberal-Republican deal is binary, and it is a purposeful either-or black and white situation to pit people against each other. So many things in politics now are just an emotional trigger on purpose to get people to vote a certain way. And
or to get them to not vote.
I think that if you can strip away those labels and strip away those preconceived notions and talk to someone human to human being, take away jokes, take away trying to be mean, any whatever adjective, and speak soul to soul, that then you can start listening. And I also think it's very important to ground yourself, and if that person wants to start ranting for an hour, let them rant. They want to go through different emotions, and until they're ready to be at a grounded point to actually talk, then you can listen and react back and forth respectfully.
The main way I feel about this political climate is that I cannot wait for it to be over, and I want to be like beyond 2020. Like, I'm sorry, we just wasted 3 years on this Russiagate hoax on behalf of whatever people are trying to cause mayhem in our government. There's been changes on our healthcare. If you really wanted a third-party opponent, were you out doing grassroots campaigning? Like, what kind of action have we done? It's sad, and ultimately, it's okay because it's exposing what is supposed to happen.
Okay, I want to back this up a little bit. I want to address a couple of different things here. First off, the Russiagate thing. Did Russia hack into, some computers here in the United States and mess with our elections? Probably. But, is that what really went wrong in 2016? No. What went wrong was that the Democratic Party cheated, that there was all kinds of cheating going on, and the Republican Party, I'm pretty sure, cheated as well, but didn't get caught so much at it, so it wasn't as blatantly obvious. And that's the thing, is it, how common is this? I mean, okay, like, take for example, the leaked emails from, to and from Hillary Clinton. Did Russia have anything to do with leaking those emails? I would say probably not. But whether they did or didn't, the content was what it was. And we got to find out that there were a lot of things being said and done that shouldn't have been said or done. Now, if Russia or anyone else, anywhere else, was responsible for that, I'd like to tell them thank you. By all means, I'm not encouraging that people hack anyone else's email. I don't think that sort of thing should be done in general. I think it should be avoided. But as far as, the people getting to know if they're being lied to and if things are being done to take our democracy away, so at least we're aware of it and we can try to fight to make things better, I'd say that's a good thing. And, what else was it? I'm just going to back it up a little bit more. And
on behalf of whatever people are trying to cause mayhem in our government. There's been changes on our healthcare. If you really wanted a third-party opponent, were you out doing grassroots campaigning? Like
that was it. She was talking about if you really wanted a third-party opponent, were you out doing grassroots campaigning? That is such an important point. Because there are people out there who support a third party, and they'll vote third party, knowing good and well that their third party candidate probably won't win. Maybe even supporting either the Democrat or the Republican. Say, for example, in a presidential election, you might have a Democrat, a Republican, and a Green Party candidate on the ballot for president, and they'll go ahead and maybe vote for their Green Party candidate, even though they do, maybe like the Democratic Party candidate a little, or like the Republican Party candidate a little, because they like the Green Party one more. Which I'm not against that. If they like the Green Party candidate more, I would say by all means they should vote for the one they like more. But be out there and advocate for that candidate, and don't tell people who disagree with you, you need to vote for my candidate because my candidate's party needs to beat your candidate's party or whatever. I mean, this is, and it's a complicated thing to even figure out how to talk about. But I mean, for example, when a Democrat comes and talks to me, an independent, and tells me that I need to vote blue no matter who, they are, in a sense, doing the equivalent of, roughly the equivalent of telling a Republican that Republican has to vote Democrat in order to support their own values. Well, if they're a Republican and their values align more with the Republican Party than with the Democratic Party, how are they going to support their own values by voting for the Democrat? The same thing, if a Republican tells me as an independent I need to vote Republican, again, that's a lot like telling a Democrat they need to vote Republican. How is that going to support that Democrat's values any better than just voting for the Democrat? Now, as an independent, of course, neither of those parties aligns with me all that well. And what I've observed, because I've asked people a lot of questions and I've listened to the answers, what I've observed is that they generally don't align very well with their own party's members either. In other words, the Democratic Party does not align very well with Democratic Party members, and the Republican Party does not align well with Republican Party members. They just align better than the other of the two. Now, sure, the stuff they tend to put on their platform, okay, that's usually stuff people can get behind, but then they don't actually try to do the stuff that's on their platform. The stuff they actually do, the stuff they actually push for, the stuff they actually manage to get done, is all stuff that if they put it on the platform, people would be telling them, get that off of the platform, put these other things on instead. We disagree with that. And they're mostly the same things for both of those two parties. And if we gotta, if we manage to elect someone from a third party who was taking that same money from those same people who fund the Democratic and Republican Party candidates, then chances are they're going to be doing the same things as well. Because guess who's telling them what to spend what to spend tax dollars on? It's the same people who funded their campaign. They're saying, look, you got money coming in to get stuff done. You've got ability to get things done. We've got money to fund your next campaign. Do what we tell you to. We'll take good care of you. I mean, it may not be worded quite that way, but that's basically what it ends up amounting to. And even if it's not flat out said, even if it's not consciously understood, there's going to be some subconscious level understanding that if they want to continue to have a successful career in politics, they sort of have to take that money and do what those people tell them to. And now Bernie Sanders is showing very clearly that that isn't the case. It doesn't have to be that way. But the alternative is to work hard, to stand your ground, and to fight for the support of the people to do what the people want. Because if we are supporting each other, then it's not about that candidate anymore. It's about us. And we don't all have to agree with each other on everything. We don't have to agree with each other on anything. But we probably will agree with each other on a whole lot of things. And there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. Where we disagree, we can have discussions. And where we agree, we can get to work.
What kind of action have we done? It's sad. And ultimately, it's okay because it's exposing what is supposed to happen. It's exposing this is what our country is right now. I'm sorry. Like, it might be a big cesspool, like metaphorically, but Donald Trump is the pot stirrer. He is stirring the pot, and it needs to be stirred, otherwise there'll just be stagnant toxicity. Yes, there is definitely toxicity, and Donald Trump has definitely been a cesspot stirrer. Or a cesspool stirrer, pot stirrer, pie stirrer. Where did I hear that from? Stirring the pie. I forget what. If anybody knows what that's a reference to, please put it in the comments. What in the world was that? Some TV series or something or other. But yeah. At any rate, yes, Donald Trump has definitely been stirring things up. So has Bernie Sanders. A lot of candidates copied Bernie Sanders in a lot of ways. Donald Trump was one of them. How sincere are these other candidates? It's hard to really say for sure. Donald Trump has said he would do a lot of the same stuff Bernie Sanders has been fighting
to get done for a very long time, and has made, in some cases, reasonable progress on over that time. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to be actually trying to get any of it done. He's president. He could get this stuff done if he really wanted to, and he's just not doing it. So, yeah, he rocked the boat. He stirred the pot. He showed people that things are wrong, but people already knew that. He pointed out what people already knew, and they said, yeah, he's right. He's telling the truth, and then they were given a choice between voting for the guy they saw telling the truth about that there are things going wrong, and voting for someone that was lying to them about pretty much everything. And in 2016, they decided they would rather elect the pot stirrer than the liar. Not everybody decided that, but enough that with the help of the Electoral College and the math behind that, he ended up elected. Now, is that a proper election? No. Is it a fair election? No. Is it a legal election? As far as I can tell, yeah. But that's got to change. We should not have elections that are legal but wrong in so many ways, unfair in so many ways. It's got to be improved. I mean, one way I've been fighting to do that for a very long time is to give people the simple right to vote against a candidate, to just cast a negative vote or a subtractive vote, so that if they can't find anyone to vote for, they have the alternative option of casting a vote against someone that they found worthy of voting against. If there are 15 candidates running for, say, for example, the Democratic Party nomination, and again, with the political parties, those are private organizations, so they don't have to implement these rules if they don't want. But if we put it together at the government level and make it so that people can vote against someone, the political parties, in order to have any credibility, would basically have to do the same thing. So if there were 15 different candidates running for the Democratic Party nomination, and the only thing you knew about any of them was that one of them was for something that you were strongly against, and you just want to stop that one candidate from winning, well, if that's all you know, you should be able to represent that vote as a vote against that candidate, and not have to say, well, who can beat that candidate that I can vote for as a vote against this other candidate, because that's bad math, and we can do better than that. Ranked choice voting also, I heard somebody recently say, that our elections have to have the principles of ranked choice voting or something like that. I forget exactly what their wording is, but basically that it was, they're talking about the Democratic Party's primary process, and saying, if people vote for a certain candidate and that candidate gets delegates, that those delegates should be able to go to some other candidate when that candidate drops out, and that the super delegates are, which aren't delegates at all, should get to get in there and help make the decision on behalf of the people, because of the fact that it doesn't really work like a instant runoff or a ranked choice voting. And I'm going, hey, if you want to put in the principles of ranked choice voting, just give the people ranked choice voting. Actually give them ranked choice voting. If you want a form of a runoff, if you want to say, well, instead of, if there were delegates awarded to a candidate and the candidate drops out, that you should give those delegates to some other candidate. Well, then why not actually have a runoff vote? Whether an instant runoff where people say in advance, that this would be their second choice, their third choice, their fourth choice, and so on, or a runoff as in people come in and they vote again. and vote again as many times as it takes until we get an actual winner. And again, the Democratic and Republican parties are not government agencies. They're basically cartels, or they're basically a cartel split into two so-called parties, factions of the cartel. And they should not, in my opinion, be using government equipment and present it as a government election to do their nominating, because that's a nomination process. That's a party nomination process. And if you're going to let political parties do that, then I think the bar should be moved to the point where we can have several of them doing that and not just two of them. Whatever that takes. And how many, I don't know. Where do you draw that line? I don't know. But the thing is, they put qualifications on these sorts of things, and those qualifications are set up in such a way as to exclude all but two parties, so that none of the other parties ever gain enough support that they can become a viable third party, which means we only ever have two options. And that comes right back to all this money being put into politics, where, you know, some rich guy says, hey, I want this candidate to win because this candidate took my money. You know, they're the ones who will do what I ask them to, because, you know, they're listening to me. I got to go to their party and talk to them personally and give them a big donation, so I'm expecting them to do what I want. But I would settle for this other one, so let's call him Plan B, or call her Plan B, whatever. And they say, you know, then they say, well, how am I gonna get people to vote for my Plan A? Well, by telling them my Plan B is terrible, by telling them my Plan B is scary, and by telling them that only my Plan A can beat my Plan B. Well, somebody else has their Plan A as their Plan B as their Plan A. You know, somebody else has the opposite, you know, which one is Plan A and which one's Plan B. And so they're telling everybody, oh, my Plan B is scary and terrible, and if you want to beat my Plan B, you have to vote for my Plan A. Well, what do we end up with? The most cost-effective way for them to make an investment and get a good return on their investment is to have only two choices for us to pick from. And the peak of that efficiency is if they're both bad choices, so they can tell us, you know, be scared of my Plan A and my Plan B, and don't believe that anybody can beat my Plan A or Plan B except my Plan A or Plan B. So therefore you have to vote for my Plan A or Plan B, and we're not giving you an option to vote against my Plan A or Plan B. So you'll have to consider a vote for my Plan B or Plan A to be a vote against my Plan A or Plan B. And that's where we get fooled, collectively.
And we would have no change in the current establishment. And so whether you like Donald Trump,
back this up a little bit.
Stirring the pot, and it needs to be stirred, otherwise it would just be stagnant toxicity, and we would have no change in the current establishment. And so whether you like Donald Trump or not, he is causing there to be a reaction, and we need to address the situation that we really have a dilemma with, which is corruption. And I think that's something we can all agree on.
Okay, and I have to agree with Kat on that it's not the only way. Donald Trump is not the only way. The only way, really, is for the people to wake up and realize that we need to make change and that we can make that change. And yes, Donald Trump helped to make that happen. Bernie Sanders also helped to make that happen. As a matter of fact, I don't think Donald Trump would have ever been running if not for the fact that Bernie Sanders finally decided, with all these decades of people begging him to run for president, that okay, he'd go ahead and run for president to fight against people like Donald Trump. Donald Trump has admitted he's bought elections. And he, did say when he was still a Democrat that, if he ever ran as president, if he ever ran for president, he would run as a Republican because Republicans are easier to fool. So, no big surprise when Bernie Sanders came along and said, he wants to get the money out of politics and stop billionaires from buying elections, no surprise that some of the people who've been buying elections said, hey, we need to stop him from doing this because that could take some of our power away. But we, the people, need to learn and resolve to do something about that, whether we get Bernie Sanders elected or not. I mean, if you're watching this and you agree that, yes, there's a problem and we need to fix it, if you agree that, yes, there is too much money influence on our politicians from a few people who don't know as much or care as much as all of us collectively, then whether you agree that we should elect Bernie Sanders or not, if you at least agree on that much, that we should that we should try to fix that problem, try to find a candidate who's working to fix that problem. And right now, Bernie Sanders is the only one I see. But if you can find another one, by all means. If you don't, if you don't want Bernie Sanders, but you find another candidate who you think will take care of the problem, support that one. Maybe if Bernie Sanders doesn't win in this election, that other one you support might win in the next election. Maybe that one will somehow surge ahead and win in this election. I think Bernie Sanders is our best choice. I think he has been for a very long time, and I'm glad he's finally running. But that's my personal opinion. Again, we don't have to agree with each other. But we should be fighting to make things better in the best ways we know how. We should be doing what we personally think will make things better and working hard at it, because that's how we end up with a better future to live in. And the way things are going right now, if we don't get working hard at it, you have to wonder how many more generations of humans will there be that will have a survivable future to live in.
What do you think about people who believe differently than you?
I've been on both sides of the coin. I've literally lived in Amish country, Christian school, homeschooled, and I literally have gone to socialist underground meetings underneath coffee shops planning protests. There are so many beliefs out there, and it is so ignorant to think that you know, because you don't know what you don't even know. And the older I get, the more I realize I don't even know myself. There's so much out there. There's just no way you know everything to a T. There's just no way.
I love people that think differently than me. In every single way. I love every single part of every person that thinks differently than me. And I ask myself, where do I stand and what do I have to learn from this person? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we all came from such different backgrounds. To think that we would think the same is maniacal. It's insane. My biggest struggle has been knowing that I don't know everything. If we do have room to grow, it's in the room of discussion. And the more we talk, the more we open ourselves to a compassionate dialectic where we're not in fear of what we're going to say is going to get us into trouble. That's where unity is feeling like, okay, I feel safe to be able to say, hey, I think differently than you. And what can you tell me to make myself maybe think, hey, I have more of the picture now? Because we don't have all the picture. We're constantly learning, every single day, and until we're dead, we're going to learn. All day, and until we're dead, we're going to learn.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, we're presented with this left-right dichotomy, and we're told, left good, right bad, or right good, left bad. Democrat good, Republican bad, Republican good, Democrat bad, whatever. It's not like that. There are good and bad facets to what they call the left and what they call the right. To each of the political parties out there, they all have their good and their bad. To each of the people out there, we all have our good and our bad. as individuals. We have things that we ourselves believe are bad, that we, in some cases can't seem to change about ourselves, and in some cases don't seem to want to change about ourselves. We have other things that we believe are good about ourselves that other people might believe are bad about us. Who's right? I don't know. But collectively, we know a lot more than any one of us knows individually. Collectively, we are a lot smarter than any one of us could possibly be individually. And collectively, we can and should move forward and make a positive difference. So, thank you for watching. Please leave some comments. Maybe consider subscribing, giving a thumbs up. Whatever you think is best. Thanks.